On December 20th, 1988, Jesse Jackson held a press conference in Chicago and told the country that the word black was no longer sufficient. He proposed a new term, African American. No election was held, no community vote was taken, no act of Congress was passed. One man at one microphone renamed over 30 million people, and the country, more or less, went along with it. The term spread through newsrooms, government documents, and university departments within months. By the early 1990s, it was standard. By 2000, it had appeared on federal forms. What did not spread with it was a definition. Jackson gave the community a new name. Nobody gave the name a legal boundary. That gap between the label and the law is where everything in this video lives. Here is the exact language the United States Census Bureau currently uses to define who qualifies. According to census.gov, the category Black or African American refers to, and these are their words, a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. That is the entire definition. Origins. Any Black racial groups. Africa. There is no American residency requirement. There is no generational requirement. There is no connection to United States history. A Somali refugee who arrived last year qualifies. A Kenyan doctoral student on a visa does not yet, but the moment that student naturalizes, they do. The definition was not written to resolve an identity debate. It was written to collect census data. The Census Bureau says explicitly on that same page that racial categories reflect a social definition of race recognized in this country and are not an attempt to define race biologically, anthropologically, or genetically. The government is not telling you what you are. It is recording how you identify. Those are two entirely different things. And every political and economic argument downstream from that definition is built on that distinction, whether the people arguing know it or not. Now bring in the Nigerian doctor from part 1. Dr. Emeka Eze checks the African American box on his federal forms, and by the government's own written standard, he is correct to do so. He has origins in a Black racial group of Africa. He is an American citizen. The definition fits him as cleanly as it fits a descendant of someone who survived the Middle Passage. The government does not see a difference. That is not an accident. That is a policy choice. And it is a policy choice with consequences that we're never debated publicly when Jackson gave that press conference in 1988. The FBA and ADOS communities argue that this definition is a betrayal. The foundational Black American framework, developed by commentator Tariq Nasheed, holds that the African American identity belongs specifically to the descendants of people enslaved in the United States, people whose ancestors built the economic foundation of this country under force, whose civil rights were won through specific decades of documented violence, imprisonment, and death, and whose communities were specifically targeted by redlining, mass incarceration, and wealth-stripping policies that continued well after emancipation. Their argument is not that immigrants are unwelcome in America. Their argument is that a remedy cannot be shared with people who did not suffer the specific harm the remedy was designed to address. That argument has evidence behind it. Research by sociologist Douglas Massey at Princeton and publicly raised by Harvard professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. in 2004 showed that African and Caribbean immigrants were significantly overrepresented among Black students admitted to elite universities under affirmative action programs created in direct response to the historical exclusion of American-born black people. Gates raised this publicly and absorbed serious backlash for doing so. The data did not change because the backlash was loud. The immigrant position answers differently. African and Caribbean immigrants who arrive in the United States do not leave racism at the airport. They are pulled over by the same police. They are denied the same mortgages. They are followed in the same stores. The racial category is not something they chose. It is assigned to them by the same system the moment they land, regardless of their passport, regardless of their income, regardless of their education. The Nigerian doctor with a Houston practice is still black in America in every practical sense that matters when he is not in his office. His inclusion in the category is not opportunism. It is a shared condition imposed from outside. The Caribbean position complicates both sides simultaneously. Caribbean-born black Americans have been central to black American political and cultural life for over a century. Marcus Garvey, the most influential Pan-African organizer in American history, was Jamaican-born. He arrived in the United States in 1916 and built the Universal Negro Improvement Association into a movement claiming 6 million members across 40 countries. Stokely Carmichael, who gave the Black Power movement its name, was born in Trinidad. These men did not arrive as outsiders borrowing black American identity. They helped construct it. The argument that the diaspora is peripheral to the black American story requires ignoring the people who built significant portions of that story. The Afro-Latino position is the one most likely to be left out of this debate entirely, and leaving it out is a statistical error. Approximately 2.4 million people in the United States identify as Afro-Latino, according to Pew Research Center data from 2016. A 2021 Gallup study found that only 24% of Afro-Latino adults in the U.S. primarily identify as black, even though by appearance, ancestry, and the daily experience of discrimination, many would be classified that way by others. They are largely invisible in black American economic data because they are checking the Hispanic box. When their outcomes are measured separately, the averages that policymakers use to assess black American progress shift. The community is being discussed without being counted. Here is the re-engagement turn. Every community named so far, FBA, African Immigrant, Caribbean, Afro-Latino, is fighting over the same label. But the label is not the prize. The programs are the prize. And here is what almost nobody in this debate says clearly. The census definition does not automatically determine eligibility for any specific program. Not reparations, not federal contracting, not scholarship access, not affirmative action. Each of those is governed separately by its own legislation, its own case law, and its own eligibility criteria. The communities are fighting one unified war over a label, while the actual legal battles are being decided program by program in courts and legislatures they are largely not in the room for. Evanston, Illinois restricted its reparations housing grants to descendants of black residents who lived in Evanston between 1919 and 1969. The census definition of African American was irrelevant to that eligibility determination. California's Reparations Task Force submitted over 115 recommendations to the legislature in June 2023, specifically targeting descendants of enslaved people in the United States. The California legislature has not enacted direct cash payments as of this recording. Bills have been introduced, Some policy reforms advanced, but the full framework has not become law. The census definition was not the obstacle. Political will was the obstacle. These are different problems. Federal contracting programs for minority business enterprise certification use a broader standard than lineage. A naturalized African immigrant who owns a business qualifies. The federal government awards a statutory goal of 5% of prime contracting dollars to small disadvantaged businesses annually. The exact dollar total flowing through minority certified businesses across federal procurement runs into the tens of billions annually. The precise current figure can be verified through usaspending.gov. The point is not the exact number. The point is that this money flows through a pipeline whose entry requirements were written by Congress, not by any of the communities currently arguing about who belongs. The Supreme Court's ruling in Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC, decided on June 29th, 2023, ended explicit race-conscious admissions policies at universities receiving federal funding. The court held that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Equal Protection Clause. However, the ruling explicitly preserved the right of applicants to discuss how race affected their lived experience in admissions essays. Universities shifted to socioeconomic factors, geographic diversity, first-generation status, and race-neutral diversity frameworks. The battlefield moved. It did not disappear. Now, pull the camera back further, because this is where the Black American identity debate stops being unique and starts being a preview. Immigration is not a black problem. It is an American pressure point that shows up first and most visibly in communities that already have unresolved historical grievances and active legislative remedies being contested. The same arithmetic applies everywhere. When the economy absorbs everyone comfortably, the melting pot is a genuine description of a functional process. When resources tighten and the pot cools, every group begins calculating who arrived before them and what share of a shrinking pie is being consumed by people who are newer to the table. This is already visible beyond Black communities. Established Vietnamese American neighborhoods in Southern California have documented tensions with newer Southeast Asian arrivals. Fourth-generation Italian and Irish American working-class communities in northeastern cities express the same structural anxiety about recent European and Latin American immigrants that their own grandparents faced when they arrived. The language changes, the structure does not. What Black Americans are experiencing in this internal identity debate is an acute version of a broader American crisis about what the country is now that the post-World War II economic dominance that made generosity cheap is no longer guaranteed. The indigenous population is where every line-drawing exercise eventually breaks down. Before the census category existed, before Jesse Jackson held his press conference, before the first enslaved African was brought to these shores, before any European set foot on this continent, there were people here. The United States government's own legal relationship with those people is still unresolved, still contested, and still producing active court cases. Every argument about who qualifies as American, black, white, immigrant, native-born, runs into the fact that the country was built on land taken from people who have never been fully compensated and whose sovereignty was never fully recognized. Drawing any line of authentic belonging in America requires standing on ground that is itself disputed. Here is the constitutional reality that ends this debate every time someone tries to settle it by force. The 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution guarantees equal protection under the law to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Any organized attempt by any community group to legally restrict the federal definition of African American, to create a lineage requirement, a generational requirement, or a historical connection requirement, runs directly into that amendment. It also runs into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination in federally funded programs on the basis of race, color, or national origin. A Nigerian-born naturalized citizen and a descendant of someone enslaved in Mississippi have the same constitutional standing. That is not an opinion about who deserves what. That is what the law currently says. Changing it requires amending the Constitution or passing new federal legislation. No community organization, no movement, no YouTube channel, and no press conference can do that. Which brings everything back to where it started. Jesse Jackson stood at a microphone in December 1988 and gave a community a new name. He meant it as an act of elevation, connecting American-born black people to a continental ancestry and a global identity. What he could not anticipate, or perhaps what he did not resolve before he spoke, was that the name would be adopted by a federal government that applied it to everyone of African origin simultaneously, without distinguishing between the people who built this country in chains and the people who would arrive by plane a generation later. That is not Jackson's failure alone. It is the failure of everyone who accepted the label without demanding that someone write down exactly what it meant and who it covered. The pot is cold. The debate is real. The consequences in contracting dollars, in reparations, eligibility, in university admissions, in political coalition building, in the simple question of who speaks for whom, are real and measurable. But the communities fighting this battle do not hold the definition. They are arguing over a box they did not design, governed by language they did not write, administered by a government that has not been asked directly to clarify what it meant, until someone forces that clarification through legislation, through litigation, or through enough organized political pressure that Washington cannot ignore it. Every battle inside this community is a fight conducted inside a building whose deed belongs to someone else. The question of who is African American will be settled when the people with the actual authority to settle it decide that the cost of leaving it unsettled is higher than the cost of choosing an answer. That day has not come. But based on everything this video has laid out, it is closer than most people think.